Once upon a time, in a small quiet village, there lived an elderly woman named Madame Agnes. She was known to be a strong and proud woman who had raised her three sons all by herself after her husband passed away. People in the village admired her for her strength, but only few knew the truth about her. Madame Agnes had long been involved in dark and occultic practices, and she used her hidden powers to gain wealth and influence. Her three sons, Samuel, David, and Michael, grew up to be hardworking men. Each of them got married and had children of their own. They loved and respected their mother, unaware of her dark secrets. Madame Agnes, however, has sinister plans. Over the years, she has made patches with evil forces, and in return for her growing power and wealth, she has to make sacrifices. At the first, she offered animals and small tokens, but as time went on, the spirits demanded more and more, something closer to her heart. Madame Agnes began using her grandchildren for her occultic practices. Whenever one of her son's wives gave birth, a strange illness will come over the child shortly after. The child would cry endlessly, fall ill, and eventually die. The villagers were puzzled by the deaths, and the families were heartbroken. Yet no one suspected Madame Agnes, who pretended to be a loving grandmother, grieving with her sons and wives. She would console them, saying it was God's will, and they would have more children. Among her daughter-in-laws, there was one named Grace, who was married to the youngest son, Michael. Grace was different from the others. She was a woman of deep faith, always praying and trusting God. When she gave birth to her first son, a little boy, she noticed something strange. Whenever Madame Agnes visited their house, the baby would become restless and start crying unconditionally after each visit. At first, Grace thought something of it, but when her child suddenly fell ill, just like the other grandchildren, she became deeply worried. Grace prayed earnestly for her son's recovery, refusing to accept that he would die like the others. She also began to notice strange things, like how Madame Agnes would leave the room with a secretive look in her eyes whenever the baby was sick. Grace's spirit was troubled, and one night in her prayer, she asked God to reveal the truth about what was happening. That very night, she had a vivid dream. In the dream, Grace saw Madame Agnes standing in a dark room, chanting strange words, while holding a doll that looked just like her son. She saw the old woman sacrifice the doll to a dark, smiling spirit, smiling wickedly at the spirits, promised her more power. Grace woke up in a cold sweat, horrified by what she had just seen. The dream felt so real that she could no longer ignore her suspicions. She realized that Madame Agnes has been using her grandchildren for occultic sacrifices. Grace knew she had to act fast. She prayed even harder, asking God for protection over her son, for wisdom on how to expose Madame Agnes. She decided to watch closely whenever her mother-in-law visited again. The next time Madam Agnes came to visit, Grace pretended to leave the room, but secretly she kept an eye from a corner. As expected, Madam Agnes approached the baby's crib, whispering something under her breath, pulling out a small and strange object from her bag. Just as Madam Agnes was about to place the object on the baby, Grace burst into the room and confronted her. "Mother, what are you doing?" Grace asked, her voice firm, though her heart was pounding. Madam Agnes froze, startled by Grace's sudden appearance. She quickly hid the object, but it was too late. Grace had seen it. She demanded an explanation, but Madam Agnes tried to cover her tracks with excuses. However, Grace was no longer afraid. With great courage, she told her husband Michael everything, including the dream she had. At first, Michael found it hard to believe that his own mother would be involved in such evil. But when he saw the fear in her wife's eyes and remembered how his own child has fallen ill just like the others, he began to wonder. Together, Grace and Michael decided to confront Madam Agnes. They prayed for strength and wisdom before they approached her. When finally they faced her, Michael demanded the truth. At first, Madam Agnes denied everything, but under pressure and seeing the conviction in Grace's eyes, she finally broke down and admitted to her terrible deeds. "I did it for your sake," Madam Agnes said, trying to justify herself. "I sacrificed them to ensure that you will be successful, that we will have wealth and power. But there's no justification for evil she has done. Her children were devastated. Her daughter-in-laws were heartbroken." Grace, however, did not stop there. She continued to pray, asking God to bring justice for the innocent life that has been lost. Not long after the confrontation, strange things began to happen to Madam Agnes. The dark spirit she called upon for power turned against her. She started losing her wealth. Her health deteriorated and she became isolated. The same spirit that had once promised her greatness now tortured her. No doctors could explain her illness, and soon people in the village began to talk about how karma has caught up with her. In the end, Madam Agnes, who has sought power through evil means, was left with nothing. Her grandchildren grew up healthy and strong, thanks to Grace's prayers and her courage in exposing the truth. The family learned that no amount of power or wealth was worth the price of innocent lives, and they never allowed darkness into their home again. Grace and Michael, with their children, continue to live peacefully, knowing that light has triumphed over darkness. And as for Madam Agnes, she lived out her final days in regret, haunted by the very force that she once embraced.